Welcome everyone. I think we're just having a few more people join the session. Just give it one more minute. Yeah, I think I'll kick everyone off, Aaron, just with some housekeeping. So, hi everyone, and welcome to tonight's tech series, Why Adopt a Zero Trust Security Strategy. This event has been brought to you by eSynergy Solutions. We're a technology consultancy delivering business value through the cloud. Too often we see organizations reluctant to begin the zero trust journey, and more often than not in our experience, it's a lack of knowledge and understanding of the design principles and technology stack involved in making this significant change. So in today's session, I'm joined here today by our lead associate, Aaron East, who's going to be discussing the reasons why and how organizations should look at moving to a zero trust security model, and why cloud migration is often an opportunity to make and how you can accelerate your migration. So just a bit of housekeeping before we begin. If you have any questions for Aaron, please ping them across in the chat box, which you should find on the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer them at the end of the talk. We are recording the session, and the slides will be made available with the recording after. So now I'm going to hand over to Aaron to begin. Over to you, Aaron.
Thanks, Adele. Welcome, everyone. Let's get started. I'll just give you a little background on myself. So I come from an engineering background. I'm not a security architect. I was developing for various financial services organizations, so generally highly regulated organizations, both in security and compliance, and yeah. So often difficult places to make change. And then I suppose over the last sort of 5 years, 6 years, I've been focusing on cloud. My first project on the cloud was actually in 2011, but there I was more on the engineering side, but I was involved in the construction of infrastructure as part of a team. I guess in the last sort of 5 years, I sort of focused more on automation or DevOps. And then cloud as well, using various CSPs, AWS predominantly, though I've used Azure, GCP, and some other ones you might have heard of, DigitalOcean, Scaleway, sort of inexpensive cloud solutions. And then I've also looked at sort of the Kubernetes side of things, so deploying components using containers, using the Kubernetes scheduler. So yeah, I've got a very colored background over the years. You can hit me up on LinkedIn afterwards, or yeah. On to the presentation. So zero trust network security. What is it? Why use it? And how can it accelerate your cloud migration? So what I'm trying to do here is sort of give you an overview of what it is, what we're talking about, the subject matter. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about this. It's becoming fairly prominent in the media as one of those kind of catchphrases, zero trust. But I think also we need to kind of understand why it's come out. So, the evolution of the threat landscape. So we'll talk a bit about why zero trust has come about. And then I think we'll look at it from a design perspective as well, understand, what the implications are of zero trust. And I think what's interesting for me is, this is it is a shift, a big shift, but it is still an iterative change, at least from my point of view. It's a step change. It's a big step change, but it certainly is a step change. And then I think what's relevant is the cloud. Right? Many organizations are migrating to the cloud or adopting cloud, and here is a real world application. So we'll dive into that. And last, you have some options some time to ask some questions, and yeah, and I'll give you kind of the key takeaways from the deck. Anyways, zero trust fundamentals. So let's get into the crux of the subject matter. So here, why? I guess, like, what is zero trust, right? It's really inherently about not trusting the network. Yeah, the network is hostile, right? So it means you need to protect yourself against that. I think this really becomes relevant in cloud because you're on a shared network. Yeah, is it worth not encrypting your traffic on a network you don't control? You don't know who's on that. You don't know what actors are on that. So I think we'll dive into that a little bit later. But some of the things you need to think about in terms of zero trust, in terms of this, what we'll talk about in a minute, this control plane, are things like identifying your clients. This could be a person, this could be a machine, using AAA, limiting access, right? So applying policies, you're not granting someone, oh, we know who you are and now you can access everything. They should access only really what they need and what they, what they need in order to do, they consume the services they want to, right? And then you've got obviously the the securing of data, right? So this is encrypting traffic and encrypting at rest. Yeah. So I think we need to really kind of call it the fundamentals, really. I mean, that's the kind of description, but these are kind of the rules to live by. And from an architectural point of view, are really important because they need to be incorporated into your security model and possibly into your landing zone designs, and really just about writing these things down so it's clear to people why you're doing these things, right? Because zero trust doesn't come with no costs and no time. It is, as I said, a step change, and a significant step change. And we'll dive into that a bit more. So the network, as we talked about, always hostile. Yeah. External and internal threats exist on the network at all times. Now, this is not something completely new. This is something that's been around for years. It just depends on the type of organization you're working in, right? So certainly in the payments industry, I've seen this. This has been certainly one of the principles that security architects have followed. And it has its knock-on effects, right? It's trying to connect to services internally. You still go through the same scrutiny as if you were consuming services outside of the business, or or having connections come in. Same sort of things, right? Firewall rules, authentication, authorization, traffic routing, opening ports, all this sort of stuff was still applied. Yeah, so that's not completely new thing. Network locality is not sufficient for deciding trust in a network. I like this one a lot, actually, because it has a significant impact on how you deploy and run workloads in the cloud. And we'll go into that a bit more. Every device, user, and network flow is authenticated and authorized, right? So all those edge devices that so the perimeter devices where a user comes in, they authenticate themselves, they're going through a firewall, they're going through some sort of load balancer, connections are terminated, and they land in, they go through the DMZ, they land into some trusted zone. This is the model that we often see today. I think what we're also saying here is that scrutiny you're going to apply throughout your network. Yeah, because you're not basically saying, oh, you've gone through all those things and now you have free reign because you're in the trusted zone. And free reign, obviously, organizations don't do free reign, but they have maybe so they could exercise some more constraints in that zone to prevent obvious things like not securing traffic. Yeah, that's a big one. Policies must be dynamic and calculated from as many sources as data as possible. Yeah, so this is using a number of data points to basically understand and kind of, I guess what you're looking at here is react to a possible intruder. Yeah, so it gets at that point fairly sophisticated. Moving on. So I think here we're gonna just look at the traditional models, and when I say traditional, it's not like this is 10 years old. This is fairly new, and there's been something that has been evolving over the years, right? And I think there's a lot of components here that, lie within zero trust. And that's why I see this as an iterative change. But I think if we juxtapose these, you can probably understand things a little bit more. And there's probably a few synergies or things that you might, if you used if you use Kubernetes, you would see, right? So control plane being the obvious one from just looking at this slide. But let's go through the first area, right? So we've got internet traffic coming in, typical user consuming your service. Yeah, they're going through, it could be a load balancer. Sorry, I'll correct that. Lead balancer. It should be load balancer, it's a typo. And then making possibly terminating that connection in the DMZ, right? Entering a private network using that technology, and connecting to an application server. The application server connecting to the PCI server or database or something like that. Nothing over the top and complicated, but what we've got here is we've got the segmentation here, right? So the DMZ being the area where there is a publicly, there's a network interface facing the public internet. Yeah, so we don't trust this as much, right? Because this is where the intruders would start, right? They would proceed to start. They would try and compromise one of these machines, right? Where once you've gotten through that, the idea is that it's a more trusted zone, that you've identified yourself, you've gone through our controls, our measures, our security measures, and now you're in this trusted zone. And often organizations, depending on the size and the type of organization, this trusted zone can be quite complex, right? It can be not just this trusted and privileged zone, but many tiers to that. Yeah. So I think the other side is now you've got this zero trust. So remember, network locality is not important, right? So you have your remote employee, as you did on the top there, connecting to the control plane, and the control plane basically is identifying who they are, and then giving them the access to what services they're allowed to or authorized to use, right? So then they can act on other services, like they can connect to an application server, the load balancer, and here again it says lead, it's meant to say load balancer, which connects to the app server. That doesn't mean that this this technology is vastly different, but just the way that load balancer has to, in order to act on the application server, has to be managed by that control plane. And same with the app server, right? So the app server again has to be compliant, so it can access and talk to the PCI server. Yeah, and I think the other thing to note is, zero trust doesn't mean we have to blow away our existing networks in one big bang and move to this principle. No, this can be introduced and then augment your network. So you see on the very right here, you've got security gateway and legacy service. Security gateway could be the VPN, right? So remote employee goes through the control plane and then is allowed access to the VPN, which allows that into that private legacy zone, we'll say, and access to those legacy services. So it doesn't need to be, as I said, it's a step change. It's an iterative change. This is something you can introduce to your networks, existing networks, and move towards this direction. Now continue on. So again, I think we kind of touched into this a bit on the control plane. Two concepts you really want to understand. You want to understand the control plane and the data plane. The data plane is basically everything else, right? All the other services in your network, clients, everything, And the control plane is managing access and controls around services accessing other services within your network. I think here you've got to think a little bit about how this would work and how to manage it. A lot of these tools we'll touch on a little around around the cloud aspect of the talk, but you're really looking at putting in fine-grained policy, right? You want to apply fine-grained policy, because what it allows you to do is it allows this sort of this restriction, right? This a service, a client, a person, an employee, they only have access to what they need. Yeah, it's important that you're following this kind of rule. We're not just granting them access because they've authenticated. We are authorizing them, so we're giving them the roles and the access that they have been granted. So, moving on. So the evolution of the landscape. So this I actually wanted to just throw in here because it's my first experience of zero trust, really. Now, that term wasn't coined because this is a number of years back, well, good part of a decade now. It is actually a decade, but yeah. So this was kind of my first experience of having an intruder, right? And I remember I basically moved outside of London for a little while. Uh, and did the normal thing, set up my internet, and my provider here was BT, and they gave me a router, and off I went. I didn't pay close attention to it. Once I'd had the internet, that was it, really. I presumed that my ISP had given me a secure router, and I had a private network, like a private home network, like most people have today, and everything was fine. But actually, it turned out that that the actual network was, with the router, was very easy to gain root access. And around this time, there was a denial of service attacks going on by Anonymous on a number of organizations. And I found that actually the intruders, what had happened basically is, so I had a number of laptops on the network, my wife's, myself, and some devices like an iPad and things like that. And I think I had some sort of a media device as well for the television. And I had my old original MacBook Pro, when the first one came out, when they shifted to Intel processors. So this is very old laptop, weighed a ton. But I still kept it, and it still ran. And at the point when I got it, I installed this tool to basically remote control it. And that remote control, what it did is it basically it started up something called, oh no, let me look at my notes here, X11. And this was like a way for this remote control to execute commands and basically display the media device on the laptop, and you could kind of, it acted like a TV. You could get that kind of behavior. What was interesting about it is none of that was secured. So anything could remote call this, and that's actually what ended up happening. So all of the laptops in all the devices all had a set of security on them. They all had a firewall running. They all had good passwords and authentication, and none of those were compromised, but this one computer was. And I think what was interesting about it is when I caught on to it, I started to think about, I'm in this situation where I can't trust the network I'm on. Everyone stop what they're doing. We can't, no one make any payments. This sort of stuff was going on. And eventually I worked out what the problem was, and I upgraded the firmware on the router. And I actually, in the end, bought a new router, installed a new router, and that was the end of it. But I think what it did teach me was actually safeguarding your services, even in your own trusted network, is a really smart thing to do. Really smart thing to do. Anyways, let's shift to the next one. This is a bit more of an attack that is common today, and I think what we're talking about here is this is like, and I'll give you the example that when I first kind of started with AWS, you set up, and not when I first started, but let's say probably a couple of years later, we're setting up VPCs, you're routing traffic, and you're setting up your ingress rules and your egress rules. And your egress rule tends to be wildcard. It doesn't matter. If it's inside our network, it can go out and connect to what it likes. Now, a lot of organizations don't do that. They have proxies in between. They have like a blue coat. Some organizations like that. They have a whitelisting. They have maybe blacklisting. Whatever they do. But tend to, when you're maybe a small enterprise or small organization, you tend to just stand this up, and you have you have your ingress rules, and you're making sure that you're only able to connect on certain ports, but your outbound rules are pretty loose to very loose. And this is where an attacker can take advantage, right? Your service goes out to make a call somewhere, and whatever reason it can find that source, or it has that source, and it can push malware to that server, and then look at starting to control that server, right? It's TCP traffic, so it can go both ways, right? Yeah, you've basically end up with an attacker who can control one of your servers inside your trusted zone. And like many organizations, small organizations and even large organizations, you didn't encrypt the traffic internally, right? It was always on the perimeter devices. You were encrypting traffic, and then after that, you're in your trusted zone and you're connecting to your application server, and it's all over HTTP. So if they've managed to get hold of one of your servers in your trusted network, all they need to do is start listening to traffic, and they can collect what they need. They can start to get users' credentials. They can start to look at certificates. They can inspect your traffic, right? So it's a very real problem, and it's a big flaw, and often it's it's down to this trust in this zone, right? And obviously there is some complications and difficulties in encrypting traffic and encrypting data at rest, but I think now you'll see that a lot of the tooling has come a long way, and these are a lot easier to implement, right? So I think it's good to this is really trying to build up the argument and the need for zero trust, right? We can start to see that there are, because we have this view of a trusted network, and we loosen our security rules around that network. And if we're actually on a shared network, which with the example I'm giving on AWS, we are on a shared network. You really need to question that trust. Now, I have made quite a few points against the zoned security model, today's kind of security model. I mean, let's say that in a couple of years, type of network segmentation, all of this stuff is useful. It's not bad, right? I don't think we're saying this is what the point I want to make. This is an iterative step. This is an iterative step change. It is not we did it all wrong, we're going this way. No, not at all. All of the tools and stuff that we use today that we've built, right? Like NATs, firewalls, stateful firewalls, network segmentation, a lot of these things are all going to become as part of the building blocks of zero trust. We're just starting to think that, what, the more and more we move to the cloud, the more and more we need to have the principle in mind that we should not be trusting the network that we're on. Yeah. And it safeguards our services. And in an intrusion, and that example I gave you, in an intrusion where someone has installed malware on one of your devices, if it only has permission to do what it does, right, it starts to reduce the blast area. If traffic is encrypted, if data is encrypted at rest, accessing and getting hold of data is almost next to impossible, right? Apart from maybe some of these large government organizations that have means to no ends to decrypt traffic. But the general, the kind of, and I wouldn't say general, but the attackers, it's a difficult ask to try and start to decrypt someone's traffic. Yeah, it's not something easily done, and it's not going to be what they're going to have. So they're not going to look at that. They're going to look at other holes, right? And this is where I said again that a lot of the tools that we have today, they build on top. They basically build and lead to us to a zero trust model, right? So I don't want to sound like I'm basically, I don't know what the word would be, but saying all bad things about the trusted zone model, because it's not true. It's not true at all. So on to the next point, iteration. Yeah. We're making a step change here. Oh, sorry. And I think when you're adopting zero trust, right? Because this is, again, I don't want to, I really want to paint, make the point here that this is a step change, but a large step change, and it will affect the business. Yeah, it will affect the business across a lot of points, right? Compliance, security, the application teams, testing teams. It will affect a lot, right? And I think it's an infrastructure teams. It's a big change, and you need to have in mind why you're making this change. Yeah. So I think the clear one there was the point around the evolution of the threat landscape. Things are changing. The way that attackers are getting intruding your organization is adapting to this zone model, and they know the holes in the zone model, so they're attacking, getting into that trusted zone where traffic is often not encrypted, where traffic at rest is not encrypted, all these problems, right? And then it's free reign, right? Migrating to the cloud and the utilization of the shared network. Yeah, so again, bringing home the shared network. You're moving to the cloud. It is not a network you control. Yeah, I understand you use VPCs, but you still don't have the view of the whole landscape, right? You need to understand that this is a hostile environment. Yeah, and I think you need to protect yourself against it. And I talked on a couple of those solutions. So there's lots of tooling now out there helping us get towards this, zero trust, right? And I think there's a lot of modern tooling that it's worth keeping an eye on, because it's developing rapidly, right? So some of the obvious ones here, Kubernetes is a lot of the constructs I've talked about, control plane, fine-grained policies, AAA, all of that is built into Kubernetes, right? Securing traffic, securing, storage, stateful. You can integrate with that as well. Key management, very basic Kubernetes, but you integrate with Vault, and then you've got other great tools coming out, right? Where all aspects of this, not just the controls, but also the monitoring side of things, the alerting. And I think there's a lot of good options there, a lot of good options. So let's move on to the cloud and start to talk about some real world examples. So I think from my perspective, one of the big things in a migration was connectivity, especially for very organizations that have a lot of compliance. So we're talking organizations in the financial services industries. They take these types of changes, meticulously, right? Because they need to ensure security, they need to ensure that they're meeting compliance, all of these reasons. But what you find is you still have this model around, this kind of network locality, trusted zones type of thing, and you end up building on top of this. So one of the methods of doing this is direct connect or AWS site-to-site VPNs, or even organizations that are looking at doing multi-cloud, have a lot of vendors. They look at this carrier-neutral framework, right, where they connect it to a central place, and it has fairly fat pipes to connect to other things. Yeah, and then you've got other appliances in the marketplace, API, and then we'll get into the last two in a minute. I think what's interesting about these is that they take time to set up, and trying to manage the maybe connectivity to your clients continually using VPN is it's not an easy feat. It's a large amount of infrastructure to manage. It's a fairly common practice, and there can be many reasons for it, and I'm not trying to negate those. But what's interesting is, if you move away from this locality side of things, then the VPN becomes unimportant, right? You've got a service, we don't trust it, it needs to go through the control plane, and then it has access to services that it's authorized to use, right? And that can be done many ways, right? That can be done through utilization of an API gateway if it's some sort of service trying to access API endpoints, or it can be, a service that just simply, needs to authenticate using mutual TLS auth and have encrypted traffic, and it can then act on that service. I think what you find is once you start to remove these shackles of basically, oh, I need to go through a VPN because I need to talk from one trusted zone to another trusted zone, you start to remove the costs and the time around these and managing this, right? And I think that this perception is that this is one of the major step changes in zero trust. But I did find, like, there are organizations, large organizations, who are looking at this, that all traffic is now going through an API endpoint, right? So you have other actors and other services, they have their own network, and they do stuff over here and they do stuff over here. This is all going through API gateways or mutual TLS. And this is their traffic. There's no direct connect, there's nothing. There's just this sort of secure traffic that we use every day as part of our interactions over the internet. Yeah. Moving on. So I just wanted to quickly touch on this. This is really about a bit of a timeline, and it's related to AWS, right? So it's not all CSPs, but what I'm trying to make the point here is, at the beginning, when I first used AWS, we were using security groups, the classic ELBs, and network interface. So we had a public network interface and a private network interface, which could then talk to some other services. So think like maybe there was an application server that had some security groups on it and that had two network interfaces, and one could talk to the database, and the database had access, they could communicate over that network interface. Yeah, there was no concept of VPC. Then introduction of VPCs, NATs, ACLs, ELBs, ALBs. It became more of this trusted zone concept that we looked at before. And it built on top of that. There started to become marketplace appliances like FortiGate, UTR. You had the introduction of Shield, and you had this early solution WAF, right? Which didn't have layer 7, but had some of the basic things that smaller organizations or organizations that maybe don't need that level of inspection on traffic. And then you had things like, and I think the 2016, 2018, these kind of blur. You had, I think you had Direct Connect earlier than 2018, but I'm talking more. It's building on top of this trusted zone concept, right? Building the connectivity so you can connect and secure between your VPCs. You can connect and secure between different different CSPs and on-premise, all using these sort of these VPN appliances. But now today, if you look at what AWS is really pushing towards, they've introduced layer 7. So what I think that means for me is more that your edge device, your perimeter devices, or edge devices in a zero trust concept, but let's say perimeter devices from an old, the kind of zoned perimeter design. They are now introducing a PaaS service, something that you can construct and modify using configuration IAC, and the costs are significantly less than some of the large appliances like FortiGate UTR, where you're talking quite large licensing costs. So it's not something that you're going to stick in every VPC. So you're going to end up with this sort of transit VPC and fairly complex routing rules, right? Where I think now you can kind of start to rely more on duplication of these services across your different VPCs, and you can look at reduction in sort of complex routing and transit gateways, and really start to flatten that network a little bit, and not look at this zone concept, which can end up being quite complex when you start having numbers of clients where each client has an account, each has a VPC, and then traffic all has to be routed through this sort of central transit VPC. It becomes actually quite complicated and cumbersome to change. where I think when you look at things like a control plane, and you remove this need of trusted zone and network location being important, and removing the VPN concept, and just applying that control plane to all of your services all over your network, it really starts to change the dynamic. I'll quickly touch on this because I just wanted to kind of, for some people who are maybe new to the subject, containerization, they might have a good concept of the container scheduler like Kubernetes, but really a lot of these things are ubiquitous. They kind of, these constructs, they exist in Kubernetes, and some of them can be taken are used in zero trust. And I think what's important here is that actually this can be a really nice way to implement zero trust. Now it does have its implications. If you're traditionally using VMs, you're moving to a containerized environment. But this is a good way to have all those types of things, that control plane in place, because it's something that's built into Kubernetes. I'll keep moving on here. So I touched on this a little bit around the PaaS aspect. I think you really have to be careful around the costs and the cost implications of zero trust. So I think if you're looking at, basically you're saying, I will authenticate, authorize every service and every service communication between services, on the edge or inside, you can end up having many appliances, right? And I think that's what you have to be really careful of. One side is just the maintenance and configuration of it, and two is the other side of just the actual cost, the AWS EC2 instance, if it's a marketplace product with a licensing fee on top of it. If you can try and move to PaaS where you can, and template this and create some policies around that, you can start to almost like what you do with a cluster, you're duplicating your nodes, right? You start to have these edge devices dotted around places, so that you can get the same level of authentication, AAA, firewall and networking rules that you have on the edge, that you have when an unknown client comes into your network. Right, I'll stop there, and we'll go to questions.
Great, Aaron, thank you so much for presenting. I'm just going to just get up a question that was submitted during the chat. So the first one is, how do you go about integrating this with legacy infrastructure?
Okay, so a good question. So I think we touched on that a little bit here, and I'll go back to the slide because it wasn't clearly obvious. But if you look on the right here, you've got the secure gateway legacy service, right? So think like normally you connect with your VPN and into your company's network, and then and then you can act on services they provide. So there's no reason why you can't wrap this service with your control plane, right? Now, how you would do that, there's many ways of doing it, but what's important is that this network is still your clients are still going through this control plane, and they're acting on services, right? Just as they do with anything. So a VPN gateway is just another service, right? It just happens to be a way to traverse into a network and have over an encrypted traffic, right? So there's no reason why you can't add this to an existing network and still secure your legacy, what you're calling legacy network, and slowly shift everything over to this model. It doesn't need to be, now we do it this way, everything changes, right? Not a big bang approach. It's a good question.
Thanks, Aaron. I think you should also have received a question into the Q&A.
Yes.
I can read it
By
out.
adopting zero trust security, are we introducing single point of failure at any points? It's a very good question. Yeah. So I think when I think of this in the firewall appliance side of things, right? The firewall appliance, standing up a FortiGate UTR is a couple grand a month, right? And if you're looking at something that's handling a lot of traffic with all the bells and whistles, it can be really expensive. Trying to stand this up in multiple landing zones or regions or wherever could be a very costly exercise, right? I think what you have to think about is try and move towards PaaS. I think we don't want to create this centralized transit gateway, because as this point made, it does become a single point of failure. You want to try and break this up, right? But I think you have to really think about this in terms of cost and implication, right? So not just, okay, we're removing this single point of failure and now my costs have doubled. There needs to be a good reason behind this. And I think you need to think about the architecture that you're putting together. You're looking to, again, really remember the locality aspect of it. You're really not trying to create this concept of transit gateway traffic comes to wash through this and then leads into your other trusted VPCs. No, we're looking at starting to say, actually, we don't do this. All traffic, depending where it's going, is going to be audited, right? And it's going to be authorized. It's going to be checked, right? So we're looking at increasing our controls. So you need to really be careful about the cost implications of that. And I think with zero trust, the idea is that you are moving away from these centralized appliances, that you still utilize these appliances, but you're not using it in such a way where you've created the zone architecture, right? You're trying to break those apart. You have a control plane that you can access. It's quite ubiquitous in this. It's a cloud, but yes, it should be. This is going to be one of the biggest impacts if it were to go down in your network. So it does need to be built like you do your applications, right? It should be clustered, should be resilient, should be highly available. So I hope I answered that question. Any other questions?
Yes, we've had another one come through. What's a good place to start with introducing Zero Trust Network?
What's a good place? Like, what do you mean by good place? Like, where to start in terms of like attacking this problem? I think you know what? I'll answer that, because that's actually quite a useful thing to understand about this. I think really, again, with security, it's really important, because there are lots of great tools and great things to do. It's really important to understand your requirements. Yeah. So for example, let's say you're an organization that has a series of API endpoints, and those are talking to your trusted, your partners, and they connect to those. There may be little need to do traffic inspection. Yeah, you might have some anomaly checks, but you may not need that layer 7 activity, right? Because it's not really useful for this scenario, right? So you really need to start to think about your core requirements, and then they need to drive your security model, right? And then that can drive your landing zone design in AWS or another CSP. And from there, you create constructs, and then you understand what level of security that you want to do. And it's a trade-off, right? There's a couple things here, right? There's the cost implications of running these appliances, and there's the configuration and the overhead of that. And then there's also the risk, right? Are we talking about payment data, or are we talking about some anonymous website or publicly accessible website data? You really need to think about your network, what's going on there, and then that drives the solution, right? What your requirements should drive your solution, and it's really important to identify those. And then I think one aspect I look at is, I say, okay, so this is the model we want to move to. What have we got, right? So this is for a customer that already has a network, not going greenfield, right? They have a network. What are the major step changes here, right? So often it'll be there's no traffic encrypted in the trusted zone. There's no data encrypted at rest. I could look at tackling these things first, right? That would probably where I would look to start. And then I think the other thing as well is to start to look at locality and the importance that you're often driven by locality, and that's driving a lot of your design principles. So you should probably look at altering that. And then I think really important, obviously, is that control plane, right? So if you're really looking to move towards zero trust, you need to create the control plane, and then you need to look at how you're going to secure your legacy network, and then how you're going to secure your new network services.
Thanks, Aaron. Another question is, what are the main reasons organizations struggle to implement the zero trust security model?
That's a good question. I think you have a lot of people embedded in the zoned model, right? It's not a completely flawed model, right? Like there have been lots of controls on trusted zones to try to ensure that the attack, the different types of attacks that are coming in are altering, right? So you've almost got a little bit of a move towards a zero trust concept, but it's not there in its totality. And I think what you've got is a belief that this is a because it's work, this is a good way of doing things, right? And generally it is, but it's only good as until you have your intrusion, right? And maybe multiple intrusions. And for large organizations who don't want to change, it's a difficult one, right? And I think what has to be done is it has to be looked at making step changes. Yeah. So you need to look at where you can make the step changes, like what I was saying around securing traffic in your trusted zone, around securing traffic, data at rest. Yeah. And then I think you can start to look at building out the control plane. What I think what's interesting about organizations is they'll say this and go, well, what's the value? What's the importance here? And I think you take it back to a slide I talked before with the two kind of core principles. Was if I get those, where are they? I think they're here. Yes. So if you're migrating and adopting the cloud, like many organizations are, you're moving to a shared network. You really need to rethink your security model when moving to the cloud. It is not the same. I think that's one of the major things. And then the evolution of the threat landscape. Yeah, these are the reasoning behind making this change. And then I think when you're looking at where to make those changes, again, back to comparing what you've got to what you want to get to, and then starting to look at how you can make those those changes. Because it's something that's not going to happen overnight unless you're in that very lucky situation where you're building out a new solution in the cloud, and you're making everything go into that, right? And then you've got really an opportunity there to make a major step change and advance towards zero trust. Any other questions?
Give it one moment. No, I think that's everything. Well, Aaron, thank you so much. It was great to have you present and share your insights. It'd be great if you would be able to share. I know you've got a slide with opportunities. If someone wants to follow up, they can obviously reach out with you directly. And obviously, please do head over to the website if you'd like to find out any more sort of case studies that we have or any further information on eSynergy. But thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for joining today.
Thank you.
Well, take
Bye.
care. Bye.